Hello, everybody. I'm Eureka John, and this is the Metaverse Think Tank. This is episode 1. This is our Genesis episode, and we decided to create the Metaverse Think Tank as a response to all the hype and all the fandom that is coming from the Metaverse. So we have Nicolas Weber and Camilo Echeverri, and they both are part of the Meta Game Hub DAO. And the Meta Game Hub DAO, I will let them describe it in full, but in short, it basically is a way for people to invest in property rights in the metaverse. And since a lot of people right now don't really understand what the metaverse is, it kind of sounds weird to a lot of people. So we're here to create this think tank in order to formulate in everyday concepts and languages so people can understand exactly what the metaverse is. So we're doing this right now in a series of different segments. This is the introductory episode, and then we're going to move on to other episodes that focus on specific aspects of the metaverse. So yes, I just want to go ahead and let Nicolas Weber and Camilo Echeverri introduce themselves and talk a little bit about how they got into the metaverse.
Yeah, thanks so much for the introduction, John. And yeah, it's a pleasure to start this because I think really education is the key, right? So in order to foster mainstream adoption for the metaverse, quickly about myself, I've been in the crypto space since 2016. Started like most people with trading, but then quickly realized I'm more in it for the real world use cases, so to say. Hence, consulted a couple of projects, was part of the founding team at Amazing Blocks, and also co-founder of the tokenization working group at the European Blockchain Association. And then as the kind of next step toward entering the metaverse and the DAO's kind of ecosystem, as I'm also a huge fan of decentralized autonomous organizations in general, I co-founded together with Camilo and a couple of others, DAC, which is kind of, it's kind of like an incubator and software provider in one entity in that sense, which is helping to jumpstart various projects. One of them, which is kind of one of the first brands that we are rolling out with, is MGH, which is the convergence of NFT, the metaverse, and DeFi in that sense, right? So we need to foster that MetaFi branding on that respect. So yeah, that's quickly about myself.
So yeah, John, thank you for having us here. I'm Camilo. I'm in charge of operations at MGH. A little bit about my background. I actually met Nico at school. We studied finance together, started working in the financial industry. Also started investing in 2016 in the crypto space, went through the pains of the bear market. And then during that time, I started learning what the technology can actually do and got really immersed in it. So at the end of 2020, we decided to start MGH to actually foster the development of virtual worlds, of NFTs, of DeFi, and this whole convergence. So, first of all, I think the metaverse is a topic that has been hyped a lot, actually. You see it everywhere. I saw a meme yesterday, top words used by startups in 2020 was VR, AI, and stuff like that. In 2020, metaverse. So it's a very interesting topic. There's a lot of people talking about it, but I think there's not. Everybody has his own opinion on what the metaverse is, and I think it's cool that we have this space here to actually think about the implications of virtual worlds and how can they actually change whole economies. So yeah, I'm super excited to be here.
Yeah, and the first analogy that I always hear people say is, have you seen Ready Player One? Yeah, and that's what everybody immediately jumps to. And so it's almost a prerequisite to, in order to understand the metaverse, is to watch or read the book Ready Player One. I've tried to explain this to my parents, and I'm sure you guys have probably as well, or to somebody that has no idea about blockchain. And they say, well, can't you really just find the same thing in any type of World of Warcraft game or Roblox or Fortnite or anything like that? And that's not really my parents. They don't know about that. But anybody else, anybody with a basic understanding of gaming or social media, they don't really see what the significance is. So what would you think? How would you explain that?
The metaverse basically is an ecosystem, I would say, of virtual value exchange. So that's what, from just like a very high level perspective, I would kind of describe it. Obviously, there's a lot of different details. There's games in the metaverse, fights. There's governance decisions being made. There's lands that are built, with worlds on top of them, like houses and events, galleries. But just from a high level perspective, I would just say it's a form of digital value. So it's something, it's the next evolution, I would say, to a certain extent, also of technology, because it's kind of, thus far, technology had always been kind of fragmented. There was technology 1 here, technology 2 there, technology 3 here, and the metaverse is kind of a hub of all these different technologies, I think, coming together as well, right? Because it can also have a real-world influence, or so to say, the real world can have an influence on the metaverse, which is something that, for instance, with games, when you play video games, it's not something that's happening, right? It's not like a simultaneous kind of evolution or life cycle which simultaneously happens to the real world, but in the metaverse, that's the case, right? So to a certain extent, also I would say, to sum it up from my perspective, that at least myself, I'm already kind of living in some sort of metaverse, right? Especially with COVID and everything. Everything is, virtually held. Any meeting, any business decision is made virtually. So to a certain extent, one could already argue that we're already in some sort of value exchanging, metaverse, to a certain extent, still fragmented on different platforms. But, the real vision is of the open metaverse is that you have a seamless kind of, a process of fluctuating within the metaverse and interacting with the different community members and entities. Yeah.
Huh. Yeah, I definitely agree with you. I mean, we spend almost all day on meetings, which are on the internet, right? Talking to people on the internet, and we run our business on the internet. So we could definitely say that we are experiencing and living the metaverse. I think for me, it's the metaverse is more like the digitization of everything. It's where you actually live a large percentage of your life in the virtual world. That's how I could actually explain it to somebody that doesn't really know anything about crypto or social. Well, I mean, or these technologies it's not only about playing a game, but all the experiences that you have on the internet that can be in a way also monetized, and that include this sort of value exchange. But generally, the metaverse is a place that you can go to find games, to find music, films. The programs that you like everything is brought together in an immersive experience. So that's how I would define it.
Yeah, that's a really great way to put it. And I love the idea that we are already, at least have our toes in the metaverse. I wouldn't have met you guys and have this video conference if I wasn't interacting in some way with the metaverse. My viewpoint of one of the main differences of the metaverse versus something like Roblox and Fortnite and just in general, just being on the internet, is the idea of centralization. And everything having to go through a centralized server. The metaverse, ideally, what would distinguish that is decentralization. And so what is decentralization? How would you explain that to somebody?
I would have to say that there's also obviously the chance of a centralized metaverse, right? So in Ready Player One, the Oasis, it's also a centralized metaverse in that sense. So technically speaking, that's also possible. But when you have that convergence or that connection with the crypto and blockchain industry, then we're speaking about the open metaverse, which is something that projects such as Centraland or the Sandbox are pushing, right? But still, I would say that, we have to also still be careful, right? At some point, the metaverse will be, in the best utopian case, fully decentralized, but still right now, if you look at the ecosystem, obviously there's still some sort of entities or structures behind these ecosystems that are pushing them, at least. It was the case with basically any blockchain-based protocol, right? Where there's some sort of entities behind it that are pushing it. And the decentralization is kind of also an evolutionary process. Once more people join the metaverse, and hence obviously the governance and kind of the interactions become more diverse, and hence also more decentralized. So that's kind of my take on the decentralization topic. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the metaverse is more like a new way of organizing like communities and people, right? So we had religion in the past, and we have the nation states, and now that we have the blockchain technology and these decentralized networks, we can actually coordinate people and their incentives in a different way. So I think that's one of the engines of this whole movement in that regard.
Okay, so you say it's possible to maybe go the way of the Oasis. And I guess if I can explain to people who don't know what the Oasis is, kind of a centralized top-down structure controlling everything that goes on in the metaverse. And then when people would plug in, put on their glasses, go log in as their avatar and their person, they are subject to the rules of the Oasis. In this scenario, a very dystopian scenario, we would all be under, our central bank digital currencies operating within that structure and standard and only being limited within that specific framework, or we were completely decentralized. And there's a growing form of interoperability between all these games to where it becomes more of a like the internet's built off of TCP/IP web standards, the www.com, right? And so there would have to be some development of some similar types of standards in the metaverse. How can this be achieved if every single game and entity has their own competing interests?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I think for instance, if we talk about the nation state, we always have like this social security number, we have like our ID, we have everything that is like linking us to that persona. And to some extent, one of the key elements of the metaverse is that you need a set of rules and a set of things to actually make it possible, right?
Uh-huh.
And I think one of the cool things about, the blockchain, and for instance, in this case, Ethereum, is that you have that possibility to actually give to every single aspect that is being that is happening in this virtual world. You can give it ID, you can give it ownership, uh-huh. And that is one of the key things here, from my perspective.
Yeah, definitely. I would, absolutely, I agree that, as it is a diverse ecosystem of value, right, there's obviously also going to be different interests. But, while the metaverse is to a certain extent scarce as well, right, at least the way it's programmed, there's still quite, I think, or at least more space for these different interests also to kind of, either be complementary or just you don't have to worry about this other person's or player's interest. That it's not necessarily going to be an issue per se, but who knows, right? I mean, there could also be some sort of Easter egg that allows the total governance of one of the metaverses that we don't know about. So you never know on that respect, obviously, but I think it's definitely the best approach generally when we talk about very, very powerful technologies. I mean, it's the same with artificial intelligence, where a decentralized structure, while it causes here and there more friction and complication, is generally always the best way to move forward because it's just fairer, right? It can never be 100% fair, but at least it's better than fully centralized structures from that perspective.
Yeah. In a way, I was reading an article leading up to this, and I think you guys read the same article, but Ethereum is kind of the base monetary layer for now that will allow the commonality until the rest of the interoperability between all these different interests and games and centralized platforms begin to merge together with their interoperable tokens. But Ethereum is, say, if you wanted to move out of one game and then if you wanted to sell your sword in one game and then move over to another game and buy another sword for your character over there, the common base between that is Ethereum at this point. At this point, you can't really transfer one sword from one game over to another game quite yet. We're still kind of stuck in silos as far as I'm concerned. Am I correct about that?
Yeah, and I think that's one of the main issues that we're facing right now, right? You have all these virtual worlds and that are separated, and they're only relevant in like only one corner of that metaverse, right? So that connection is missing, and if you want to establish the connection, the only way that we can do it right now is like with OpenSea or Uniswap, right? Like you have your NFTs in this world, and you go to Uniswap, switch you get some ETH, and then that's like the medium of exchange in that regard. But the idea would be that the metaverse grows in a more seamless way, right? So where it's like united based on different objects and different worlds that actually coexist, right?
Yeah. So the whole idea of composability would come into play as a bunch of different Lego blocks from different games or different metaverses all being able to be brought into the same one and interchangeable. Am I right about that?
Yeah. Okay. I mean, that's the same thing we had with DeFi, right? Yeah. I mean, like in 2017, 2018, we had all these different like tokens, and like they were all doing like their own thing. And then we got DeFi, and we found a way to like build these blocks, right? Of, okay, I can take this token and I can use it as collateral to get that. And I think that infrastructure that was built was one of the main things that actually propelled that whole DeFi summer, right? And like what happened in 2020, right? With all these different protocols and tokens that were being traded. And yeah.
So how does NFTs play in all this? It's another buzzword and another piece of hype along with the metaverse. So can you guys maybe give me a description? So we have metaverse, NFT. What are some other buzzwords that are flying around that are all kind of interconnected here? And in order to be able to explain this type of stuff to people, we have to tell them how it all it operates together. So how do NFTs operate within the metaverse?
Yeah, basically NFTs, represent a form of value. So basically, what you have to understand if we dive into the metaverse is that, the digitalization of value happens in the form of the token economy, right? That's evolving. And therefore, any form of value, unless it's a coin of a native currency, right, of a blockchain, it's a token, right? And any form of value will be in the form of a token. And hence, that's where NFTs come to play. NFTs will not be the only tokens, obviously, in the metaverse that are relevant. For instance, metaverses can have their own native token in that sense, right? For instance, Decentraland has Mana, the Sandbox has Sand, and these tokens, to a certain extent, also assure a certain degree of governance and generally managing the ecosystem, and are used for transacting within the respective metaverse itself. And NFTs really represent often very unique items within the metaverse. So lands, for instance, which is, at the end of the day, we don't have to think too complex about what lands are because they're just real estate, right? But virtual real estate. If you say that we have a, so to say, parallel universe in the metaverse where every human interaction in that sense that you would normally have in the real world could happen in that metaverse, just a lot crazier to a certain extent, then basically, NFTs play a crucial role within this ecosystem because they represent these unique items, right? And so the same then goes to lands, which are unique because, well, on each land you can build something else. And it's the same like when you walk around and you see different properties where you can build something. So basically, that's one utility of NFTs, and obviously other utilities within the metaverse where any type of digital creation, especially in the form of art, can be represented, so to say, or the NFT is that art in that sense. So because NFTs have perpetual royalty models that you can kind of embed into them, and hence that makes it quite helpful, so to say, for these type of utilities, as well as intellectual property, which could also be utilized within the metaverse even. So yeah, and a lot of other aspects like skins, weapons. There's so many different things that you can utilize NFTs for. So that's why they they inherit a very, very important role within the metaverse, because any form, to sum it up, right, any form of value, or not any, but most of the value within the metaverse is represented by an NFT.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's pretty much about ownership, right? Like as I mentioned before, you need to identify like all the different things that are within these virtual worlds, and NFTs are like the perfect vehicle for that in that sense, right?
Okay, so NFTs represent something unique, non-fungible token. So you have a metaverse, and it's all built on code, and each piece of that code represents a certain characteristic of an object. And in a metaverse, all these objects have to interact with each other and react to each other as if they were alive, kind of like in our universe, right? So an NFT is something that's unique. It's your character. It's the piece of art, and then that would represent the ERC721 token. And then you have the fungible aspect of it, which would represent like what, gold, for instance, just or whatever currency they're using in that metaverse. And
yeah, I mean, the currency would be more like sand, for instance, in Sandbox, right, which is the native metaverse's currency. And I must say, like, just quickly to add to the ERC 721, right, which is the typical NFT standard, I do strongly believe that we will most likely see different token standards in the future, because like ERC 1155 and stuff like this, which like are just a bit more flexible in regards to their degree of application, because they can kind of be like an NFT that's fungible make to like in layman's terms, so to say. And just to add to that, so there's a lot of different opportunities of different token types that kind of fit their respective utility within the metaverse, because you can just code, so to say, the function of the token the way you envision it and the way it best fits that respective asset that it is representing. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, and I think that's why MetaFi comes in place as well, right? Because I mean, you have this new layer of GDP that is building up, right? Because it's pretty much digital value, and then you need to find ways to actually monetize that digital value and see how those NFTs that have lots of value can be actually used for different things, right? Uh-huh. So I think that is like a crucial aspect. And the ERC 721 standard is super important. That will, I think in the next couple of years, it will move towards a more fungible and liquid way of treating those types of assets.
Okay, so there's the ERC 721 token, which is the unique asset. Then they've also come out with, there's an ERC 998 standard, which is a way to create, say for instance, you have a character and basically they're naked, right? And then you have the ERC 998, which is the clothing, the sunglasses, the hat, everything within that. And then in terms of property rights, you would have one large country, and then within that would be the ERC 998 tokens that would represent each little municipality or county or whatever within that. So the metaverse is made up of all these different token types in a way. And so how does MetaFi work into that? What is MetaFi, first of all? Let's back up for a second. And you threw out MetaFi and I was like, whoa.
Yeah. I mean, for me, MetaFi is like this mix between what you can do in the metaverse and how you can monetize it. So for instance, if you for instance have a virtual parcel, right, in the metaverse, and this parcel is super expensive because it's near a big player within this virtual world. So you have this parcel and you say, okay, good, I invested my money here, and I cannot do anything with it. Like, I mean, I could curate it and get somebody to develop it, but you could actually think and say, hey, I'm going to take this parcel, I'm going to use it to pay, I'm going to use it as collateral to pay the mortgage for my home, for instance. That's one thing that I would think could happen in the next couple of years, since I was saying, like, there's digital value which is embedded here, and it's lots of value. I mean, we're not talking about pennies. And I think that the FI part of it, like finance, metaverse finance, is that you can actually create structures and infrastructure to actually generate, for instance, liquidity for those assets that are being held within these virtual worlds.
Okay.
So So that's one thing. And for instance, if we talk about the crypto market will be regulated harshly in the next couple of years. I mean, that's clear.
Yeah.
Because I mean, they know they cannot stop it, but they will figure out a way how to regulate it. So we have problems. So in that regard, people have to get a little creative on like what can be done with these virtual assets. So I think MetaFi is like that concept that engulfs this. That I mean, they're not even thinking about how they're going to regulate those NFTs that are being then used as collateral in the future, because it's inherently digital, right? So it's like a whole new aspect of financialization.
Yeah, and you know, the reason why MetaFi is really becoming a trend is because, you know, like it is from a perspective of, you know, the upcoming laws like MiCA, which is happening in the European Union, and other laws. I mean, the SEC is looking at you know, DeFi very carefully, and they even want to regulate some of the incentive kind of generating protocols in that sense, because, so to say, they are a security. I mean, we already saw certain aspects happening, like with Uniswap, right? With kind of deleting some of these synthetic assets from the front end and these type of things. And you know, I know it also from experience. Security tokens are attractive on the one hand, and everyone wants to do something with it, but it's very, very hard to really have a sustainable business in that space still, thus far to this date, because usually it's very, very hard, you know, because people forget that you're talking about a security which requires prospectus and all these other aspects, and you know, you can't just integrate this into a, you know, ecosystem of DeFi where there's no KYC, no AML and everything, which would be perfect because it's frictionless, but obviously it's hard for obviously the regulators to understand and to allow this to happen. I mean, in certain jurisdictions, it's possible to here and there integrate something into DeFi, but it's still very limited. And that's why MetaFi comes to play, right? Because it is possible to let's say, you know, at least efficiently integrate metaverse-based assets into DeFi, while you have to kind of solve one pain point. So that is, I think, the transparent pricing. I mean, some metaverse-based assets have transparent pricing, so to say, in that sense that they have just a fixed price. But obviously, in the long run, when it comes to secondary market trading, I think we're not yet at the stage where we should be, because there's a lot of, you know, craziness going on. I mean, the NFT market generally, but obviously, it's not going to prevail like this forever. And this is why also we at MGH now thought about this situation quite carefully and also integrated or started implementing the concept and now the development for the respective oracle that will provide obviously transparent pricing then for MetaFi. You know what I mean? Like, so basically, while right now, when we look at an NFT of any form, it doesn't have to be a metaverse-based NFT, but generally the only price that it has comes from, right, like just what the market says on OpenSea or whatever, but it's not like a fair or evaluation, right? So there's no like appraiser or something like this, which actually does like the respective analysis. And hence we came up with this oracle model also, and with the algorithm behind it to allow this. And I think once it doesn't have to be our model, right? You never know, but once kind of oracles in that respect also become more, you know, relevant and part of the metaverse, then I think really that's when MetaFi will also kind of be able to seize its potential, because the fair and transparent pricing is there. And then I think, you know, it will also foster a degree of standardization for this, right? Because it's much more intuitive and understandable and also coherent why I now can receive loan XYZ with that respective NFT. And it's not like, okay, it's sold for, I don't know, 1,000 ETH, and before that it sold for 0.5 ETH, right? And what is the price now that I can get a loan for this item with?
Yeah.
So that's why we came also up with this solution, just on a side note.
That's really cool. It kind of creates a valuation for something that would not be able to think anybody would think that would have value. And how do you determine what a JPEG is worth, or what some virtual item is worth, or virtual property? And I did see you're kind of measuring the value of property around it, kind of like what we do in the real world, what realtors do. So Metafy is a concept, right? It's not some kind of project or company or anything like that. So I just want to clarify that, right? So Metafy could potentially be a new buzzword.
Yeah, absolutely. It will.
All right. So DeFi was the last year's buzzword, and DeFi sat on top of the Ethereum virtual machine in the same way that Metafy sits as a buzzword kind of on top of the Metaverse, right? Okay.
Yeah. One could definitely argue that. I mean, it's something that is not dependent on one metaverse or one player or one DeFi tool. So it's basically something for everyone, so to say, to leverage. I would say it's like another avenue in terms of the future of how the entire financial sector is kind of evolving in that sense. So like DeFi, and then you have Metafy, which is kind of, I think thinking about it is kind of could be kind of its own new kind of fi in that sense.
Yeah. Wow. There's so much to unpack. I could go on. We're out of time now. Now that we have some of the base concepts talked about, in the next episodes, we have a whole lot to unpack. I mean, as far as going into detail with a lot of this. So with that being said, what would be the simplest, quick little nugget way of just saying in an elevator, this is your elevator pitch? How do you get in the elevator and somebody sees a t-shirt that says Metafy on it or Metaverse on it? How do you explain that in the context of going up an elevator?
Yeah, I mean, if I would have, like a Metaverse t-shirt, I would say like the Metaverse is the digitization of everything. It's the next iteration of the internet, and it would be the way how people, it's the next step of human interaction. That's how I would put it.
Okay.
Yeah, and from my side, I mean, first of all, it depends if I would explain the decentralized or centralized metaverse in that sense. But if it's the open decentralized metaverse, I would I must say that what Camilo said is probably also something that I would say in that respect, and potentially adding that it is the future of digital only value in that sense, to kind of sum it up, because it's value that only exists because it's digital, right? And it's the future of virtual reality in that sense as well, right? Yeah, because I think everyone can kind of have kind of an idea of how this looks like when you have these VR goggles on and you're just entering in this space. So I would kind of also use this as an example, because while most people not really understand what really the metaverse is, they understand kind of that you can have these goggles on, right, and jump around in the virtual world. And so I definitely would use this probably to explain it in a nutshell.
Yeah, it just depends on how many floors you have to go up in that elevator, right?
That's true. Or we just send them a link, right?
Yeah, exactly. Here's my link.
Yes.
All right, then. Well, thanks, guys. We will conclude this episode 1 of Intro to Metaverse. And next episode, we will be going into more and more detail of it. So stay tuned and follow us on our various channels. We will link all those. And yes, have a good day.
Awesome, man.
All right.
Awesome. Looking forward to the next episodes, guys.
Likewise. Bye-bye, guys.
Bye.
Take care. Have a good one.